All right. Good morning, everyone. Seems like I haven't seen you in a while, and here we are again. I am going to go ahead and just ask everyone to mute. And if you can't, I will go ahead and I'll do that as well. Good to see everybody. You can say hi in the chat. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. You can say hello in the chat and welcome to this wonderful session. We were just talking about data. And so obviously you all must be a little bit interested in that. And so we reached out to our friends and colleagues at Casas, and they connected us with the wonderful Jay Wright. I'm going to introduce him. A couple of housekeeping things is I'm just going to go ahead and
they look really comfortable and warm too.
So we're gonna go downtown next.
And I'll ask everyone just to stay muted.
Yeah.
That would be great. And we'll get started here. Housekeeping is that remember to fill out the sketch form at the end of the conference today so you can receive your continuing education hours. We'd ask that you just stay muted so it isn't a distraction to the presenter. You certainly can put comments and questions into the chat, and Jay is very accommodating and will address those as they come up throughout his presentation. Certainly we hope that you just have a wonderful day, and it looks like the sun is coming out, and so this will be a great session. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jay Wright. He manages the training and technical assistance for federal and California accountability requirements, including California WIOA, Title II, AFLA reporting and requirements, and the California Adult Education Program. He has worked in several areas of adult education, including special needs, program development, and data analysis. And he applies his experience to improving programs and instruction and identifying issues that require targeted technical assistance. With his extensive knowledge of federal and state reporting requirements, he does provide a variety of trainings, workshops to guide schools and agencies with assessment, implementation, and data management strategies and procedures. And we thought that this would be a lovely time to invite him to come and to talk about strategies that we all might employ within our program to understand. So I'll turn it over to you, Jay. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll blow up the PowerPoint here. Hopefully everybody can see the screen fine, and I'll move here to our agenda. So sorry, I'm gonna pepper you with a couple of noxious survey questions before I dig in too much, just to kind of get a better understanding of exactly what I'm working with. So I'll start with the easy one. As Patrick said, I'm Jay Wright from Casas. My understanding is Michigan is a mixed state where some of you are probably using Casas and some of you might be using other assessments. You're a mixture of us and other assessments. I'll just verify, is that correct? Or are you all in on Casas or all in on somebody else?
That is correct, Jay, that we
Okay.
are a mixed state, but I will say Casas has been a great partner with us, and we actually negotiated a state rate for providers to use e-Casas. And so many programs are moving in that direction or have already.
Thank you very much. And I'll just say for you guys in the chat, I'd be curious, like how many of you use Casas? If so, are you all in, or is it just kind of on the menu with other stuff? Do we have Casas power users here or not so much? The follow-up to that question is within our, e-Casas, Casas e-test, we have a database management system called TOPS Pro Enterprise. My understanding is a few of you in Michigan probably use that, but probably most of the Michigan Casas users are using e-test, but not necessarily the back end and TE, but maybe a few of you are. I'll just check. Are any of you, or maybe all of you, familiar with the TOPS Pro Enterprise system that manages, state and federal accountability and, student attendance and demographics and that sort of thing? Do any of you use that? Just check it. It's not a biggie if you do or don't, just seeing if anybody's familiar with it. Okay, I'm not seeing too much on that. Do you have a Michigan state system, I think, for federal accountability? Okay, some of you are using TOPS Pro, right? Yeah, it's TOPS Pro Enterprise now. Okay, I underestimated this. Okay, great. A lot of you are on TE. Okay, so some of this will be familiar. Good. Sorry, just wanted to make sure. Well, I'm glad I asked. So final question, and I'll stop it with this. I think this is more likely to be yeses, but just kind of checking. Are you familiar with the NRS federal tables? Yes or no? Obviously, we have those in TE. If you have some other state system, I'm sure you have them in that. But we relate it to this some extent. Hey, it is what the feds are, having us all do and what they're requiring. So not a bad idea to just relate it to what they require. A little bit of it is a good way to get everybody's foot on the rail where all states kind of can relate to the NRS tables. And all fair warning, I can't remember what you said, Patrick, but I think you said I was the quote unquote accountability manager. If I were to be honest, my title is actually quote unquote California accountability manager. So I do have an annoying habit of relating stuff to California because that's what I'm working on all the time. So my apologies in advance. But going to NRS is a good way to kind of keep it familiar for everybody. Okay, so quick through the agenda. I want to do a quick recap of how federal reporting works. Some of you, I'm sure, know it well, but to get into some of the things I'm going to talk about, having at least a basic understanding of what we're doing with Table 4 is really helpful. We'll talk about the basics of how to review these federal tables to find areas where we're doing well and other areas where we're maybe doing not so well. And then we have performance rates, which my simplified definition will be how well are your students performing on the assessments. Persistence rates, my simple definition is how well are you doing as an agency capturing pairs on all your students. So that will be the focus of our efforts here. This third bullet talks about doing a little comparison with those two rates is sometimes helpful. Sometimes they're in lockstep with each other, other times not so much. A lot of what we'll talk about here this morning suggests that the alignment with these two things is a big part of what might tell you how to proceed moving forward with strategies to make things better. That is, if these two rates are in lockstep with each other, there's a certain list of things that we generally suggest that you do. If these two things are a little different from each other, not any better, not any worse, but we would suggest there's a different list of things you might want to consider to work on if they're not necessarily the same. More on that here in the presentation, but we'll talk about those two rates. Once we have a basic idea of how our performance is, then we want to look at targeted data reports. You're listening to the Casas guys, so you'll get a hefty dollop of TE stuff, but I'll try to use some generic titles to make it usable for all data systems, not just TE. So on the data side, you want to find reports that will help you improve. And then on the qualitative side, you want to talk to the staff and the teachers and the students that are included in the levels and areas you've selected for improvement. And then we have larger picture strategies at the agency level and others that focus more on our students, for both performance and persistence. And then we'll conclude, again, you're listening to the Casas guy here. So I would assume you all won't be too terribly surprised to hear that there's lots of outstanding Casas resources available for all of this. So we'll point out a few of them here toward the end of the presentation. So sorry, I've got to ask, does this sound more or less what you were expecting to get yourselves into this morning, yes or no? I say that a little sarcastically, I guess, but if it really is different, I'd like to hear it. And we can adjust on the fly or add a few extra things to this presentation if there's something missing. Okay, so I think, from the chat a few minutes ago, it sounds like the majority of you are familiar with Table 4, familiar with the NRS tables. I'm not going to go crazy on it if you don't know it well. I don't want to spend 25, 30 minutes on this, but a real basic overview here. Hopefully this looks familiar, but we have Table 4. I think most, not all, but most would say Table 4 is probably the one that's the one that matters the most out of all of them. Table 4 is the one that addresses what the feds call measurable skill gains, or MSGs. Mostly that means gains that students make with their pre and post testing. Now that we're in WIOA, I'd say pre-post is still the majority of it, but now that we're in WIOA, it includes other things, HSE, diploma, high school credits, some things in post-secondary. So it's all measurable skill gain. but the feds have those 12 levels, 6 for ABE, 6 for ESL. Without getting into too much gory detail, that qualifying pretest is what determines which of these levels the student places into. That's represented by column B on this slide, number of participants. So we at Casas have aligned our scores. All of our competitors have done basically the same thing to align the assessment system with the federal system. So every time a student completes a Casas test, it will align to one of these 12 federal levels. Then column E, the number achieved gain, those are the ones that succeeded. That is, they made enough gain between the pre-test and the post-test to move to the next level on this chart. So the way we work table 4 is the student needs to get a post-test score equal to or greater than the high end of the chart. So I'm gonna get a little detailed with an example. If you know Casas, this will make sense. If you don't, I'm not sure it will. But ESL 4 is the example I like to use. You'll just have to take my word for it here. ESL level 4 has a Casas scale score range of 201 to 210. So a lot of you that do Casas should be familiar with that. So if a student gets a pre-test of 205, that is in that range. That means they're one of those 68 students getting in ESL 4. They would need a post-test score equal to or greater than 210. That is the highest score in that ESL 4 range. So back to this example, this is showing you that of the 68 students that pre-tested in the ESL 4 range, 51 out of those 68 post-tested 210 or better. That is, they post-tested well enough to move out of ESL 4 and move to the next level. Moving on, we've got the column J, that's the percentage. That's simply column E divided by column B. That is the percentage of students at each level that make the gain. I explain this because making it, kind of oversimplifying it a little bit, this is the information that Michigan and California and all states need to use to negotiate their goals with the feds. This is what the feds are looking for. So each year you're evaluating your data as a state on these 12 levels. You're working with the feds to show your performance and negotiate, with them, the goals for your state for the upcoming years. Generally speaking, those numbers that represent your goals are going to be based on your past performance and previous year's data. I want to avoid this one. Maybe this is good news, maybe it's bad news, probably good news, but I'll just point out over here to the right, we have this section called periods of participation. I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole for right now, but I will at least say, do we all know and love POPs? Does that at least come across as a familiar term to you all, yes or no? And chat, any thumbs up, thumbs down, protests, anything at all? Okay, so, all right, so so you don't really know here, okay, so you're okay, I hope. So anyway, POPs, okay, you don't use POPs much. All right, well, I don't want to get into all the rules, but the POPs are basically what are in the federal system now, where a student can have more than one period in a year based on that 90-day rule. So for federal reporting, we might have students get counted twice if they have more than one POP. That's what the column J into the right is basically representing, is, those multiple periods of participation. Okay, so looking at table 4B, another quick review. First off, it looks a heck of a lot like table 4, same 12 levels, 6 for ABE, 6 for ESL, same basic columns. The big difference between 4 and 4B is table 4 is basically looking at everybody that qualifies for federal reporting. 4B is isolating just those students that have completed a pre-test and a post-test. So for federal reporting, table 4 is really the one that matters, kind of like it or not. When the Fed set goals with Michigan or anybody else, they're using table 4 100% of the time, 4B 0% of the time. They're looking for your percentages for all enrollees, not just those that completed the pair. But a lot of people would say if you're measuring students or you're measuring your instructional program, for fairness, you might want to use table 4B. That is, if you're measuring how well your students are doing, it's really only fair to include those that have a pre-test and a post-test and have a chance to actually make a gain. So we have 4B here. It doesn't really factor into your state goals, but if you're looking to measure instruction or just how well your students are doing and you're not worried about some of that other accountability stuff, 4B can be really, really helpful. So finally, and I'll move out of NRS tables after this, but the last one I wanted to review is one we have in TE called the Nrs Persister Report. So this is simply comparing table 4 to table 4B, looking at the, basically the percentage of those that qualify for federal reporting, what percentage have a pre-post pair. So to start over there on the left, same 12 federal levels, 6 for ABE, 6 for ESL. We have the total number of students that qualified for federal reporting in table 4 represented in column B, the total number of students that completed a pre and post test pair and got on table 4B represented on column C, and then the percentage of persister in column D, which is simply column C divided by column B. So that's a little bit of that, but that's how we work the persister. So just summarizing what this is doing for us is basically looking for each level of the students that qualified for federal reporting, what percentage of each level stuck around long enough or quote unquote persisted long enough to at least complete a pre-test and a post-test. So it sounds like you're probably doing a lot of the same sort of stuff in Michigan, but we've been looking at this a lot in California. We have other ways we look at it. We're using things like instructional hours too, but from an NRS federal point of view, the way you're looking at persistence is by looking at those that complete the pre-post test pair. For federal reporting, the persister is the one that completes that pair. So from our point of view, we think this is a really, really, really useful table. Generally speaking, if you look at your persistence rate for these levels, if you look at your persistence rate for these different programs, that's going to say a lot about how well you're doing. And it's also going to say a lot about, what sort of things you might want to consider moving forward to improve. So I'll stop the NRS recap right there, but I will stop here for just a minute and make sure, is everybody here with me? That was a huge mouthful that I just dumped on you. Is everybody hanging in here? Everybody's still following so far. All right, thank you for that. Any questions? Everybody hanging in? You can just type in chat if you want. Okay, so I'm moving here to a resource we have at Casas. So to be clear, here I'm showing you a California resource right now. It's called the Casas Data Portal. You do not need to know too much about this portal. It really is for California, but I will bring it up for 2 reasons. Number one, hey, if you're trying to see how some of this federal data works, you'll be looking at California data, so it may not mean a lot for you. But if you want to see how it works, I dare say sometimes using this portal is a good way to do it, because you can look at agencies, you can compare different agencies, you can compare agencies to counties and states, you can look at it longitudinally, you can kind of see all the data in one screen. So I'll just say for that reason, I'm going to use this to kind of show some of the concepts with performance and persistence. That is, I like using the portal so I can show lots of data on one screen rather than spreading a bunch of reports out on the kitchen table, so to speak. So this has been a big topic here lately, because we at Casas have recently gotten the most recent 2020, 2021 data up. So here's just a screenshot of how it works. Again, it's California data, so I won't get too much into the mechanical, but the point is here we have our California state goals that we negotiate with the feds. We have our statewide average, and then you can generate by agency how well the agency is performing. I use this because you can see those agency percentages for those 12 levels, and you can really easily do a compare and contrast with the state average and state goal. So for showing you how this works, using the data portal is in my opinion, a lot better way to show you how it works. So here I blew up, a different slide. It's a little bit old. We've got this agency that we've been using for a couple years that we know have some real noticeable strengths and real noticeable weaknesses. So this is what it looks like, a little bit blown up. Again, we've got the 6 levels of ABE to the left, 6 levels of ESL to the right, state averages and state goals. A lot of you use TE, so I'll say if you want to look at TE for this and look at your own data, I added some menus at the bottom. We have NRS tables 1 to 11, and we also have a report called the NRS Performance Report in TE. They're both located in that federal reports menu in TE. So if you want to look at TE data, there's a couple references for you. But going back to the portal so we can see all the data on one screen, we have our agency's performance, and we're looking at the averages and goals and doing the simple exercise of looking at which levels we're doing better than the averages and goals, and looking for other areas where we might be doing worse than the averages or goals. So here it is, really blown up. I'm going to skip to this slide where I've kind of got it all, answered here. But here we've got this screen blown up where we've got this red arrow and green arrow to give you, an example of each. So over here to the left, we've got this red arrow. That's an area where we really need improvement. That is ASE low. As you can see in ASE low, our performance there is much lower than the state goal and much lower than the state average. So looking at it right off the bat, we're going to say that's an area where we really might need to improve. I'll just stop again and make sure you see this. Does everybody see how we're doing, pretty dismally in ASE low here recently? So you can see how that percentage is a little bit lower. So we'll target that one as a possible area for improvement. On the other hand, we've got this green arrow to the right here in the low level of ESL. You can see we're exceeding the average and exceeding the goal there. So that might be an area where we, we can pat ourselves on the back because we're doing a lot better there in low level ESL. So here again, I want to show a lot of things. So I'll kind of answer my own questions here, but we can look at it in other ways. One thing I want to point out is a little bit the feature, but a little bit what we recommend is once you look at recent years and you start getting an idea for strengths and weaknesses, one good thing is to run longitudinal data. So in this example, we ran our most recent year, and then we opened it up and compared that to the couple years prior. Some of these areas, as you can see, have been pretty consistently good and pretty consistently needy, but there's a few areas that have maybe fluctuated a little bit. That low level ABE, for example, not looking good now, but not that long ago we were. So look for some of those areas that might have some variance to it. That's another way to get clues. But back here, I'll just show a couple other target areas. ABE intermediate high is another one on here. You can see the percentage for that one, much lower than the average, much lower than the goal. I'll also point out ESL intermediate low. It's probably not obvious given you haven't really used this portal, but I'll point out that's another one we might consider. Those percentages are also lower than the average and lower than the goal. I'll note those percentages are just a little bit lower. So in this case, if we wanted to target the neediest of the needy, we'd probably go for ABE intermediate high and ASE low, because you can see they're way below average, not just a little bit. But over here in the ESL intermediate area, we're a lot better there. But you can see we've got a ton of students. This probably looks a little nutty outside of California, but we've got 3,500 students placing at one level at one agency. Go figure. But the point here is the need may not be as high, but the number of students is great. So the point I'm making is when you're looking at these areas to target, it's not always just choose the lowest one. Sometimes you want to balance that with things like how many students does it affect? How does it compare to priorities in your local region and so on? You can look at all these different areas before making those final decisions. Okay, so now that we've got a basic idea, we've identified a few areas of strength, we've identified a few areas of weakness. What do we do now? What we'll sort of position here is, there's some things you might want to consider doing, quote unquote, quantitatively. That's what I'll say, digging into data systems like TE and looking at reports. You also want to consider doing some things, quote unquote, qualitatively, where you're working with your students and you're working with your staff to kind of figure out what's working well at your agency, what's working not so well at your agency, and get some solutions and strategies that way. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the data before showing some of this. Is that this is back to the data portal. It probably looks a little bit like white noise to you because it's all California data, but I went to a different tool here in our portal where we're looking at that persistence data rather than performance. So those examples I just showed you were from table 4, that is what percentage of students are making the gain. This data, it looks the same, but it's from the Persister Report. This is showing us not what percentage of students made a gain, but rather what percentage of students persisted long enough to complete a pre-test and a post-test. So what I like to do anyway when I'm looking at agency data like this is identify those areas like we just showed, and then compare it to our persistence rate. Just do a simple cross-check. So in this case, we know for sure ASE low is a very needy area. We know for sure ABE intermediate high is also a very needy area. We've already gone through our performance data to make that conclusion. So now that we've identified these areas, we're going to go ahead and look at the persistence data. And in this example, here we go again with one red arrow and one green arrow. Red arrow to the left, ABE intermediate high, persistence looking not so great. You might say here in ABE intermediate high, the data confirms our suspicion. We know our performance is low in this area. We cross-check it with persistence, and what do you know? Persistence in this area is very low. It sure looks like a big reason for this area performing low might well be we haven't captured all that many pre-post pairs for this area. On the other hand, we've got the green arrow over here to the right, ASE low, kind of confounding here, but we know we're also needy in the ASE low, but somewhat surprisingly, that persistence data is okay, or actually pretty good. It's not groundbreakingly good, but as you can see, the persistence rate for ASE low actually quite a bit better than the state average. So in this case, we know we still have a lot of improvement to do, but it's probably not related to pre-post pairs because the data shows that, we're not really doing that bad in that area in ASE low. So we need to figure out some other areas that might account for our low performance. So I'll stop again, and I'm a little bit annoying that way because we kind of get into these deep concepts. So I'll stop yet again and just make sure everybody hanging in there. Any questions? Everybody still following all this? Yes or no? Just check it. All right. Well, thank you for that. Didn't mean to do that. Sorry. I think my hand. Okay. So we'll go here. Thank you for that. Okay. So we'll go to this next slide. So again, we looked at performance, identified areas of strength and need, compared it to persistence, noticed areas of strength and need in that area. So that allows us to build this really, really, really oversimplified 2x2 grid. That is, performance is either good or bad. Persistence is also either good or bad. So you can see we just have these 4 quadrant areas representing higher low performance or higher low persistence. So everybody kind of by definition is going to fall into one of these 4 areas. So looking at a couple that we won't spend a lot of time on, we'll go first here, where I'm sure everybody here is above average. So this is where we are. That is, performance is good and persistence is also good. We're not going to talk about that one that much here, though, of course. If you're doing great in all this, maybe you don't need to be here. Maybe you're already doing everything right, so congratulations. The second one, we're also not going to really get into too much. It's mathematically possible, but I got to say just barely. But this is if you have really good performance with low persistence. It is possible, but very unlikely. if this is the case, we would say, well, yeah, still beef up your pre-post date test rates if you can, but we won't get into this one much because gotta say, very rarely do people fall in this quadrant. So we're focusing on these other two. That is this lower left quadrant, that is performance is low and persistence is also low. That's obviously the big one. So if you're low in both areas, that is kind of like we looked at with ABE intermediate earlier, where we looked at low performance and saw persistence is also low. We say focus on the fundamentals. That is, we need to look at basic cleanup, look for missing demographics, look for the 12 or more hours of instruction. And then, of course, also look at that persistence side, look at your pre-post testing rates, by level, by class, by student, and so on. So if everything's low, you need to focus on fundamentals, get everything clean, get your pre-post test rate better, rinse and repeat, look to see if that might at least make persistence better. Maybe that'll take performance up with it, maybe it won't, but look and get the data fundamentals right and then move forward after you get that right. The final quadrant is also a big one. This is where we have low performance, but persistence is actually pretty good. This is kind of like that ASC low example. If that's the case, then we say fundamentals are fine, but it's probably not going to fix your problem because in this example, persistence is already pretty good. Because persistence is already pretty good, that suggests already that you're doing well with those data fundamentals. You're collecting demographics, you're getting 12 or more hours of instruction, you're getting pre and post test pairs, because all of those conditions are already necessary in order for your persistence to be high. If those are problems, way more likely that your persistence is going to be low. So in this case, we say, in those basic areas, you're probably doing okay. So to improve performance when you're in this situation, the issue is you need to address instruction in the classroom. So for some areas, you might want to work on fundamentals, others it relates more to instruction. And so I'll move on. So what do we do now that we know how to compare? We know that we need to focus on instruction, or we know we need to focus on data and persistence. What do we do next? So we're sticking with the quantitative and the qualitative. So three terms: gaps, hotspots, diamonds in the rough. To be clear, that's definitely not technical talk. Those are just my cutesy little terms that I like to use for different things you might look for in your data, different things, where your data might give you clues of things that you can improve, things that you might want to target out. And then back to the qualitative side too. Once you identify these levels and you dig down in the data to find more information about those levels, what should happen is you're going to have some specific classes, specific teachers and staff, specific students or groups of students that probably emerge as being prominent in those levels you're selecting for improvement. So once you isolate that data for the levels you're targeting, look and see which teachers and classes and students are represented. Obviously, those students and those teachers that are represented in those levels are going to be the ones you're going to want to follow up with the most. If you're doing ABE intermediate low, talk about the teachers, students, and classes that are affected in ABE intermediate low. So follow up with them and find out what they have to say, good, bad, etc. So looking a little bit more at the quantitative side, this is just spitting out what we just saw: review targeted data reports to focus efforts. So again, my cutesy terms, but hotspots is the term I like to use for the neediest areas. So let's stick with that example of ABE intermediate low. We've looked and we know that we're very low in performance there. We cross-checked it with persistence and we're also low there. So we know ABE intermediate low in this example is a very needy area. So we want to highlight those needy areas. We want to furthermore look for hotspots within that area. So we already know ABE intermediate low is a needy area. So drill down to that area and look for those hotspots. That is, within that area, you might find a few specific classes, specific students, specific teachers, that might be a little bit needier than others. Sometimes everybody's got problems across the board, but other times it might be mixed, where you're really doing badly in ABE intermediate low because there's these couple of classes that are really, really having a lot of problems. So you might want to look for things like that to find where the bleeding is happening in each area. And again, highlight those hot spots or the neediest areas within the levels you're selecting. We might also want to look for diamonds in the rough, that is pockets of strong performance. So in this case, we're sticking with ABE intermediate low. Not always going to get lucky this way, but frequently we'll dig in. We'll see that, again, it's a low performing area. So most students, most classes, most teachers will have low performance, not high performance, but look for those pockets where they're doing well. Hey, we've got 10 ABE classes, 8 of them are really looking bad, but hey, here these 2 where the students are performing great. What is it in these classes that the students or teachers are doing that everybody else is doing? What's up with these diamonds in the rough? Then another thing to do is look longitudinally. Has this always been a problem? Has it been more recently? A lot of times looking at the historical trend is another good way to look at it, and then reevaluate it. That's a little bit what I mean by gaps, where, once you see what your targets are as an agency, as a state, as a region, what sort are you looking more to get more students jobs, get them better paying jobs, have more students learn English, become citizens, whatever the big push is for goals at your local area. What is that higher purpose? How does it relate to your goals? What sort of things do we need in our data to get there? So then on the qualitative side, it's really the same approach, just different specific tasks. Again, we're going to look for those really needy areas and find the staff and find the students that are in those classes or special programs where we know we need to improve the most. Again, look for those teachers and students that represent the strong performance. Again, a lot of times within a class, we might have a superstar student. Within an agency, we're likely to have a couple superstar teachers. So find out what they're doing that everybody else is doing. Again, what's up with those diamonds in the rough? What can we pass along from those areas of strong performance to the majority of these areas that we already know aren't doing as well? And then again, when we get that feedback, reevaluate it. What tips are they giving us? What things are they saying that we are already doing? What are they saying that we're not doing? Maybe a hint there is, a lot of times you get feedback where it's things that we are doing, but the conception from everybody else is, maybe not so much. So look for areas where everybody's understanding is maybe a little different from each other. Okay, so I'm going a mile a minute here. I'm going to just stop here. Let's do a quick little sanity check. Are people following this? Not so much. Questions? How is everybody doing? Again, let me step out here and make sure we're A-okay. So thank you for that feedback. Hopefully we're all hanging in here. So that's the, kind of the approach I like to bring. Again, there's lots of other ways of doing it. That's just one way. So now that we're doing these qualitative interviews, we're doing this data diving in TE or other systems, we're now looking for kind of big picture agency level strategies, maybe more, student level strategies as well. So we're going to try to keep it simple here. A few agency level strategies for persistence and performance, a few student level strategies for persistence and performance. So here's just the first one. If we know we need to get our pre-post test rate, here's some things we generally say. Communication, not exactly the most brilliant answer, but it all does really start there. A lot of getting everybody pre and post tested, at least from what I can say, a lot of times that grit or elbow, there's no substitute for grit or elbow grease. If that wasn't true before, I would say it's definitely true in the last couple years when you're engaging in things like remote testing and, parking lot testing, getting students into the lab, here in this small 2-hour window when your district allows you to do it, whatever. We've all come up with lots of creative ways to get this done recently, but it all goes down to communication. Who's doing what? What's the duty of the administrator? What's the duty of the teacher? What's the duty of the data manager? Does the right hand always know what the left hand is doing? Make sure we've got communication across all staff and have roles clear. In Casas land, which a lot of you apparently reside, that means be deliberate about who your Casas e-test coordinators are, who your Casas e-test proctors are, that they're all up to speed on proctor and coordinator training, and everybody firmly understands exactly who has those roles at your agency. With COVID, this has been obviously a little different, but looking at the long game, developing a detailed calendar is a real good way to separate the ones who do well with this with the ones that don't. That is, the best agencies, look at this at the beginning of the school year, look at their academic calendar, plan out their testing strategy for the year based on how your agency sets up your academic calendar, assign testing days or testing weeks, or depending on your size, for all programs. Figure it out way in advance, how you're going to go about the business of filing your students in for pre and post testing. The more methodical you are in advance, in general, the better your results will be in getting them all in and completing that testing. I don't know how things are in Michigan, but I'll just say in California, everything I've said so far, most agencies do a really, really, really great job with. This third bullet is where I would say in our state, we probably still have improving to do. That is putting all this in your local assessment policy. So I'm sure you have something similar in Michigan. I'm not sure if it's the same title or not, but we have what's called our California statewide assessment policy. We're very well entrenched at Casas with California accountability. So mostly that's the document we put together for California, but it has all the ins and outs of what you need to do statewide in terms of pre and post testing. One huge aspect of that is it requires local agencies to do their own policy locally. And this is where you're putting all this stuff for your local agency. Who are your proctors? Who are your coordinators? When are you testing? Which Casas series do you like best? We like doing this for ABE, that for ESL. How are we doing placement? Who's responsible? All of that stuff about your policy. All of these strategies you're doing, thank you, get that in writing. And again, that's the good way to ensure the right hand is always going to know what the left hand is doing. Last but not least, some TE agency level reports, a couple slides here shortly that gets into a little more details on that. So getting a little bit in the weeds here, looking at the student level, looking at attendance is a big one. Track the students' attendance. What best agencies here say is the 3-day rule. That is, if a student goes 3 days in a row or 3 school days in a row, no call, no show, that triggers a call from the teacher. Hey, are you all right? Are you still coming into school? If not, make sure you can work out with the student, a good exit strategy. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting the students to conform to us. That is, we have our classes. We want to encourage our students to have good attendance in them. Other times, though, maybe we need to adapt to them. If we're having trouble getting students to enroll for classes or maintaining consistent attendance at classes, perhaps we need to adjust our schedule, offer it at a different time, offer it at a different location, etc. Another good one is a reward system. You probably have some of this at some agencies. Just say in California, a lot of agencies have taken this approach to acknowledge those students that complete testing. My long story short is the average agency is doing this well. They're doing it by offering very, very, very low level rewards in terms of monetary value. It's usually just an agency pen or pencil or certificate the secretary puts out of the computer. Whoa, somebody's vacuuming. So real low level rewards. It doesn't, what most people say is it takes very, very, very little to have to reward the students. They're usually not out for anything big. They just like that acknowledgement they get from the school, from the teacher, showing that they're doing a great job. Okay, moving over to performance. This is looking a little bit more at instructional strategies rather than data. You know, we like to say, look at goals from a federal point of view. We don't have the federal system aligned to goals like we did in the good old days, but we're still, you know, encouraging everybody to collect goals. In California, this has been a really big deal of late. I don't think we're that unusual. My bet is you're probably looking at goals a lot in Michigan too. I think this is something a lot of people have been doing, but look at the student goals, which generally speaking should be the reason why they enrolled in adult ed in the first place. So look at the goals, make sure what you're presenting to students matches their goals. So they're getting, you know, the students are getting what they came into adult ed for. Recognition, again, big, no reward too small. When students are doing well, do as much as you can to praise the student and make sure that she or he knows they're doing a great job. Sometimes it's just test taking skills. A lot of us are e-testers. So sometimes it's the computer. Usually I don't think it's the computer, but sometimes being in the lab, having to deal with that protocol sometimes can kind of freak students out. So make sure your students are comfortable testing. We certainly agree at Casas, you know, that if you need to spend a little time with students before they go into the lab to make sure they're comfortable while they need to perform, that's certainly a good idea to do so. And then individualized instruction, that's a little bit like goals. Make sure you can identify for each student where their strengths and needs are and where each student needs to improve. And then this is just a reiteration of what we brought up earlier. That is, look and find your superstar students. You know, even in the classes that are the worst of the worst, you're bound to have at least a couple students that are performing well. Try to find a few of those superstars, look at what they're doing in the data, interview them and see what they say they're doing. Try to the maximum extent possible to share those practices of those superstar students with the ones that are maybe not superstars. And then moving back to big picture, okay. Yeah, that is the report in TE. I can't give you the perfect answer on that one, but what I'll bring up is, you know, different agencies have different, you know, are paying for different levels of TE access. So just check and see what that is. Again, like I said, I didn't think you were as all in as you are in Michigan. However, so maybe you do, if you have the NRS reports in TE at your agency, then you definitely have the NRS Persister. Okay, sorry, so going back to agency level, you know, look at things like local assessment policy. Like I said, a big thing that's been discussed now in the WIOA era is look at what you're doing locally at your agency with your local and statewide priorities. That is, I'm sure you've been having lots of fun with all of this WIOA-wide collaboration in Michigan, just like we are in California and everywhere else is my guess. So we're all learning to play in the sandbox with all of our partners. As we're doing that, we're figuring out what are the issues in terms of employment, in terms of education, you know, and so on in our region. You know, after working with that as a region, are our particular programs in adult ed in sync with all those other priorities? Look and see how all of our classes and programs are doing. Agency specific population, you know, I'm sure it's the same in Michigan. You know, we have schools, you know, kind of in, you know, LA, you know, San Diego, Oakland that are, you know, probably, you know, lower economic areas, quote unquote, you know, where we're looking at getting people the GED, we're looking at getting people jobs. But I'd say we have an equal number of agencies really that kind of defy that stereotype, where they're in the suburbs. There are a lot of older, quite frankly, affluent students that are from other countries that are there, you know, because son or daughter are at work and they want to learn English. So I use those two extreme examples to just say, depending on where you live and where your agency is, you might have lots of different types of students. Sometimes it's economics, sometimes it's age, Sometimes it's demographics, but, make sure that what you're doing at your agency is appropriate for the types of students that are attending at your agency. And then another good external issue represented by those short-term services, look at your economy. Is it good or bad? How's housing, transportation, apply some of those supportive services if necessary to help students out with their own personal issues so they can make the personal issues go away to better focus on what's going on with their instruction. And then we've talked about attendance, firm it up with a local policy. I don't know if you're big on managed enrollment, but a lot of agencies where I am do managed enrollment. That is, they'll set that attendance policy and kind of hold students to the idea that they need to attend regularly. And if they don't, then they'll make room for somebody else who will attend on a more regular basis. Okay, so I'll stop here for a minute. Is everybody still hanging in there? Sanity check, pulse check. I think we've got 10 more minutes, so I'll run through a few of these. Thank you. So again, some of you are big TE folks, some of you aren't, but digging a little bit into TE, I don't want to, I'll try to keep it loose here, but we do have what I like to call roster reports. So if you use TE, here are 3 examples in TE of roster reports. That is, it's just the real simple report listing each student, some basic demographics, pre and post test, test date, test form, score, and all that. Just a roster that lists out all the tests your students have done, by time to real easily just eyeball who's done a pre-test and who's done a post-test. We also have a few instructional hours reports where if you kind of feel like attendance is the real big crux at your agency for a lot of this, there's several reports you can use to analyze attendance hours as well. So here's where I'm getting into probably a little too much TE, a little bit too much in the TE weeds. So some of you, this will really help. Some of you might have to take it with a grain of salt, but we have a report in TE called the Nrs Data Integrity Report. This is obviously aligned to NRS federal reporting. It's got 33 items now related to all sorts of important issues for federal reporting. So if you know the DIR, we say, hey, items 8, 9, and 10 apply here. Those are the items that give you information about which students have completed a pre-test, as well as which students have completed a pre-test, pre-post-test pair. There's an item 10A that specifically just gives you the students that qualify but don't have a pre-post pair. Again, maybe the items is a little TMI, but we also have items that relate to hours between tests. That is, some items related to that federal rule to have at least 40 hours between tests. We at Casas generally suggest 70. So there's a couple items that give you information about the 70 hours between tests as well. And then there's also ways to measure periods of participation. That one didn't get a lot of airplay when I brought that one up earlier. But again, now in the federal system, the federal tables are based on POPs now, not program years. So if you have students that disappear for a while and then come back, they might have more than one POP. So really looking at those students that might have had more than one POP is one thing to look at. If you have a lot of those, that could affect your performance and persistence. The other thing to look at is look for those students that might have enrollment on the federal tables, but they don't have a POP. That means they don't have hours and they don't have a test, but yet somehow in your data, they still got in the federal tables. So that's another type of student you might want to look at and clean up. NRS reports, again, lots of things, here. These are all TE reports and TE related to NRS. These are the ones that really get into the weeds. The monitor is the one that I probably suggest the most. It's basically letting you know everything you ever wanted to know about that student's NRS performance and more, enrollment, demographics, hours, pre and post test. That's the one I say where if you know, hey, Houston, we know we've got a problem, but we're not sure what it is. Look at that NRS monitor and it will show you everything. Another one I'll bring up is table 2A. If you know the federal tables, 2A is the one, it's the only federal table that displays students with less than 12 hours. So sometimes looking at that one is good. If you've got big numbers on 2A, but low numbers on table 4, then that's a good way to see the gap might be with hours of instruction, for example. Okay, again, this is fire hose time here, but some other resources for improving classroom performance. Again, there's the DIR. 10B is the one I like for this. It's just blatantly giving you an item count. The learners that have a pair but did not make an EFL gain. Table 4A and 4B are good ones for this one too. 4A, as an aside, really gets in the weeds with those MSGs. So we saw how on table 4, we have MSGs. Usually it's going to be a pre-post gain, but you can look at 4A, how many made the gain through pre-post, how many got their diploma, how many did HSE. Of those that made pre-post gain, here's how many made it in reading, here's how many made it in math, and so on. So you can kind of dig deep and find out where those measurable skill gains are already coming from. Finally, and here I'm interested to hear if any of you here, I'm not sure if you have or haven't, but we have a lot of TE users here. Have any of you used what we call our test results report? That is, we have a menu under reports and TE called test results. These are the reports we have specifically to improve instruction. You know, it's really focused more on the classroom than it is on state or federal accountability. Thank you, Sharon. So we have what are called test results reports. Some of that relates to Casas competencies. That is the life skills side. Some of those refer to college and career readiness standards or Casas content standards. That's what you might call the quote unquote academic side. There's the menu in TE where you can find those reports. Those are the ones that we typically would say are the best for this. With that, and here's what I was prepared to show you a little bit because it was easy to show a little bit because this will help everybody, whether you know a lot about TE or not, is there's also a section of our Casas website called Curriculum Management and Instruction. So here's what that looks like. I gave you our web address. I guess I'll just sort of throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. Have any of you ever looked at this section of our Casas website before? Yes or no? Have any of you checked out this area called Curriculum Management and Instruction? Okay, all right, thank you, Sharon. Okay, so some of you have. So this is where you can get all this information. I'm showing you the screen with the breadcrumb trail. So if you want to find it, you can. And so then on this slide, I just sort of blew up that breadcrumb trail to the left so you can see what this includes. So here at the top, there's content standards and college and career readiness standards. You know, that's again what we sort of like to call the quote unquote academic side of Casas. You know, in recent years, we've kind of moved forward with CCRS. That's what relates to quote unquote Common Core. You know, we still have our old content standards too. We have our Casas competencies that have been around since 1980. Those are our life skills. We've got 9 different areas, you know, we say that represent all of those areas that your students, or quite frankly, all of us need to do in order to survive in that big bad world out there. So the reason why I make a big deal about this is one of our advertised advantages is we say every single Casas test item aligned to one or more Casas competencies, every single Casas test item aligned to one or more content standards. So at the end of the day, you can go back to these reports here under test results, run it at the student, at the class, at the agency level, identify specific competencies and content standards that represent areas of strength and areas of need. You can look at this, these sections here under curriculum management and instruction to kind of learn everything you ever wanted to know and more about these areas. The final thing on this page I'll bring up, and I'll just for kicks, I'll ask you, have any of you here used Casas Quit Search before, yes or no? If no, no biggie. I'll just say I've done some trainings. Okay, everybody has. I guess you're doing way better in Michigan than we are in California for this. I'll just say I've done trainings in California lately with people that know, everything you could possibly want to know about Casas. But even when I talk to our superstars in California, most of them, aren't really that familiar with quick search. I always get caught by surprise. But the point here is you can use this research on our website to search for instructional materials. We like to say at Casas, we're not one of the big guys. We're a small mom and pop. We're not anywhere close to being big enough to, publish our own textbooks or whatever. So we do the next best thing, and we have quick search where you can search for particular resources. So I'll go back up to this slide and just reference these reports where you can run these test results, find strengths and needs related to competencies and content standards, sort of like we looked at state level data, focus on those areas of need, find some competencies where we know we need to improve in our classroom, find some content standards and CCRS that might, represent areas where we need to improve. And then we can go to quick search. We can search by content standard, search by competency. We can search for just high-level students or just low-level students. We can search for just web resources or just old-fashioned paper resources. You can search in many different ways and get a list of possible materials that we might use in the classroom that would address that area that we already noted in our data is an area for improvement. Okay, so it's 9:31, a minute over, I guess, but I'll stop right here. I will pause for the moment, though, and just say, hey, any questions? Anything maybe that you were sitting here waiting this hour? Gee, I was sure thinking you'd be talking about this. How could you go a whole hour and not even touch on it? Anything like that that you were waiting for but never came up? If not, I'll just say any questions. I guess I'll take that as a no. So I'll just
This is
kind of
very helpful, Jay.
Go ahead there, take it away, Patrick, I guess.
No, this has been very helpful. I can tell you that I took lots of notes.
Okay, good.
learned
Well,
new
I'll
things.
do it again. I uploaded the PowerPoint. I can email it to you, Patrick, if you want to post it on your website and so on. But
Great.
here, just to make sure you all get it, I'll upload this PowerPoint via the chat again for those of you that might have missed it there at the beginning.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jay. We so appreciate your time. I know that he's in California, and so had to get up a little extra early to get ready for us. So appreciate you, Jay, doing this. And I just think the strategies that you introduce are very helpful for us to consider and to think about, and ways that either whether we're in our own classroom or within a program that we can really utilize and build on our strengths, which is a theme that I really appreciated that you highlighted on. So thank you so much for sharing all this information.
All right, thank you, and have a great rest of your Friday and weekend.
You as well. And thank you, everyone. We're going on a lunch break now, and the breakout sessions will resume at 1 o'clock. We'll see you then.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay, so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.